Most people think airports are transportation businesses. They're wrong. Airports don't move people. Airlines move people. What airports do is far more powerful. They charge every plane that lands, every passenger that walks through the terminal. An airline can go bankrupt. An airport, it just charges the next one. Recession, boom, pandemic, recovery. The money keeps flowing. And one man saw this opportunity before almost everyone else. An African immigrant from Nigeria. While investors chased tech stocks, startups, and the next viral trend, he was quietly buying airports around the world. But airports were only the beginning. Governments spent generations building these assets. He spent 2 decades buying them. Over 20 years, he built one of the most powerful infrastructure empires on earth. An empire worth more than $100 billion. An empire so massive, it eventually forced BlackRock itself to come calling. Most people have never heard his name, yet millions of people use infrastructure connected to his empire every single day. His name is Adebayo Ogunlesi, and this is the story of how one man turned airports into a private empire and why the world's biggest investors finally came after him. But to understand how that empire was built, you have to understand the mind behind it. Adebayo Ogunlesi was born in Nigeria in 1953. His father, Theophilus Ogunlesi, was no ordinary man. He was the first Nigerian-born professor of medicine. But what mattered most wasn't medicine. It was how he thought. He studied systems. The human body wasn't just biology, it was infrastructure, hidden networks working together, keeping life running, and that way of seeing the world passed to his son. After attending King's College in Lagos, Ogunlesi went to Oxford University. There, he studied philosophy, politics, and economics, a degree designed to decode how power really works. He graduated with first-class honors. Then he did something almost nobody does. He went to Harvard and earned both a law degree and an MBA at the same time. That combination changed everything. Law taught him the rules. Finance taught him the incentives. Together, they revealed something deeper. Systems only matter if you understand how value moves through them. Then came another pivotal moment. He clerked for Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, one of the most influential legal minds in American history. A man who understood a fundamental truth. The real power is never on the surface. It sits beneath the system itself. But Ogunlesi wasn't interested in spending his life practicing law. He saw a bigger arena, so he made a different choice. He went to Wall Street. In 1983, he joined First Boston, a firm that would later become part of Credit Suisse. For more than 2 decades, he operated inside one of the most competitive financial environments on earth. Deal after deal, crisis after crisis, and year after year, until he eventually rose to become global head of investment banking. And from that position, he began to notice something others were missing. The world was obsessed with speed. Markets were becoming faster. Assets were becoming more abstract. Money was becoming increasingly digital. But underneath all of it, the real economy hadn't changed at all. Goods still had to move. People still had to travel. Energy still had to flow. The world still depended on physical systems, airports, ports, pipelines, power grids, the invisible infrastructure that quietly moves everything. And then he noticed something even more important. The governments that owned those assets were running out of money. Debt was rising. Budgets were stretched. And buried inside those government accounts were assets that investors had ignored for decades. And that created one of the greatest opportunities of his lifetime. Airports, ports, power networks, infrastructure that generated cash year after year. Yet nobody had properly priced it. At the exact same time, a different kind of capital was searching for a home. Pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, institutional investors managing trillions of dollars. They weren't looking for excitement. They weren't looking for speculation. They wanted predictability, reliable cash flow, stable returns, something closer to a toll on human activity than a bet on the future. That's when everything clicked. Most investors looked at airports and saw transportation assets. Ogunlesi looked at them and saw toll booths. And that single insight changed everything. Think about it. Every aircraft that lands pays a fee. Every passenger pays a charge. Every store inside the terminal pays rent. Airlines come and go, but the airport remains. One carrier fails, another takes its place. The traffic keeps moving. The money keeps flowing. The demand never stops. drops. So in 2006, at 53 years old, Ogunlesi made a bold decision. He walked away from Wall Street and founded Global Infrastructure Partners, or GIP. The mission was simple: find the choke points of the global economy and own them. Their first acquisition was London City Airport, a test, a proof of concept, a chance to see if the thesis worked in the real world. Then history intervened, and the world handed him an opportunity almost nobody wanted. The global financial crisis hit, credit collapsed, banks failed, and markets panicked. Fear was everywhere, and right in the middle of that chaos, one of the UK's most important infrastructure assets came up for sale: Gatwick Airport. On paper, it looked terrible. London's second airport, underfunded, overshadowed by Heathrow, and operating during the worst aviation downturn in modern history. Most buyers looked at the risks and walked away. Ogunlesi looked at the same asset and saw something completely different. Not the crisis, the geography. London is one of the most important travel hubs on Earth. Millions of people need to enter and leave the city every year. That wasn't changing. The downturn was temporary. The demand was structural, and that's a very different thing. So GIP made its move. They bought Gatwick for £1.5 billion. Then they did something most financial buyers never do. They didn't strip the asset, they built it. They invested in systems, efficiency, passenger flow, operations, commercial performance, year after year, improvement after improvement. And slowly, Gatwick transformed from a neglected airport into one of the most efficient airports in Europe. At that moment, the thesis was no longer a theory. It was no longer an idea. It was no longer a prediction. It was working. From there, GIP expanded globally. Airports in Europe and Australia, ports like Melbourne, and energy infrastructure across continents. Each acquisition followed the same logic: find what the world cannot function without and own the bottleneck. By early 2024, the firm controlled over $100 billion in assets, and while the world focused on software, apps, and digital platforms, Ogunlesi was doing something quieter. He was buying the physical layer underneath it all. Because every digital system still depends on something physical. Data runs on servers. Servers run on electricity. Electricity runs on grids. Goods still move through ports. People still move through airports. He wasn't investing in the future. He was investing in what the future still depended on. Then came the moment that brought it all into focus. BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, overseeing more than $10 trillion, acquired GIP for over $12 billion. But the real story wasn't the price, it was what it meant. Ogunlesi didn't disappear after the deal. He joined the board of BlackRock itself, moving from building the infrastructure empire to sitting inside the institution, now allocating capital to it. A full circle moment, and a signal of where global finance is going next, because governments are no longer the only ones building critical infrastructure. Private capital is now central to it, and the line between ownership and influence is getting thinner every year. Through all of this, Ogunlesi never became a public figure. No celebrity status, no media persona, just consistent execution over decades. And that might be the most important part of the story, because power in the modern world doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like ownership of systems people don't even think about. The digital world feels weightless, but it isn't. It still lands somewhere. It still runs on something, and he owns a significant part of that something. The next time you walk through an airport, you're not just passing through a building. You're walking through a piece of a global system most people never think about, but everyone depends on. And the man who understood that before almost anyone else was Adebayo Ogunlesi.